Good morning. Today I'm going to be doing a March reading wrap up, which I have not done before, mostly because I haven't read this many books in a month ever before. So that's really exciting. I'm starting to understand and figure out what genres I enjoy. I'm starting new series. I'm learning new authors that I enjoy as well. So it's been a good month. And let's just start right from the beginning of the month. The first book that I read was actually a self development book called Ikigai. I used to read self development quite a lot, particularly mostly in 2024 and 2023. And then I kind of put a pause to it because I wanted to read more fiction. But this is a self development book that I had been wanting to read for a while. I gave this 3 stars overall. It was a decent book. I did enjoy that it did give, like I said, some nice reminders in there. And it's a short little book. And it's a nice book to pick up every now and then when you just want some reminders on good things to do in your life in terms of health and well-being. So, but overall it was a 3 star. Why is that so bright? Overall it was 3 stars for me. Yeah, that's the only self-development book that I have read this month, and I don't know if I'm going to pick up another one anytime soon, but that was how we started off March. Then the next book I read was called Blood and Steel by Helen Schumer. I think that's how you pronounce her surname. I really enjoyed this book. This is a fantasy adult book. I read this on Kindle Unlimited and I also listened to the audio. I really enjoyed it. One of my favorite things about this book was the character dynamics and the friendships that occurred during the course of the plot. So you essentially have a prophecy that leads to all women not being allowed to fight as warriors, and our main character wants to be a warrior, so you follow her journey, and just the friendships throughout this book were really fun to listen to. There's also some romance which I enjoyed, and the fantasy world, whilst it is fantasy, it wasn't overly complicated. It was very easily digestible, easy to get into. I enjoyed the plot, the friendships, and also the romance as well in this book. So I gave this a 4.25 star rating. Like I said, it was easily digestible, easy to pick up, and I find that those types of books are the best ones to listen to audio because it's nice to listen and read along whilst you're doing other things. So I really, really enjoyed this book. Then I actually read Quicksilver. I have heard so many good things about it, but I did not enjoy it. This is a sci-fi YA apparently, but I think it's an adult. I don't know why it's been classed as a YA. When I searched it, that's what it said, but I would actually think it's an adult just because of the content that's in there. But either way, I did not love the book. The first 20%, I was hooked, I was invested, and then it fell off until the last 20% where I got more involved in the world and what was happening. You essentially have a human main character who is basically in the poorer areas of this world, and she ends up being transported into the Fae realm and things happen there. But like I said, I only enjoyed the first 20% and the last 20%. So overall, I gave this a 2 star rating. The main bulk of the book, I got bored. I didn't enjoy the romance. I didn't like the main male character, the love interest, and it just wasn't for me. So I would not be continuing with this story. I was quite disappointed in this because a lot of people love this book. Like, it's a very popular fantasy book, but it wasn't for me. So it's not one that I will be continuing with. Next, I read Vows and Ruins, which was the second book to Blood and Steel. So these are the Legends of Thesmar series, and Vows and Ruins is the second book. This one, I only enjoyed the friendships and like the last maybe 20-30%. The rest of the book, the first 70%, it just felt like there was very little plot and it was all about the issues that were going on in the relationship. And I got bored and they kind of irritated me. So because of that, this was a 3.5 star rating because I was already invested in the world and the characters, I did want to continue it. So it wasn't awful. I still enjoyed, like I said, the friendships and like the last part of the book, maybe the last third, but there were definitely things that I didn't enjoy in the second book, which meant that I dropped the rating a little bit. The next book I read was actually Phantasma. I ate this book up. I actually listened to it on Kindle. So I read it on Kindle Unlimited and also listened to the audio, and then I ordered the physical copy because I enjoyed the book so much. And the second book in this series comes out, I think, in a couple weeks' time. So I'm very excited for that. This is a dark gothic romance. I love this. You essentially have your main character who is a necromancer and her family are necromancers, and it's based in New Orleans, and she enters this competition in order to save her sister. And then you've got these like trials that essentially occur in this competition. There is a love interest, of course. It's a romance for sure, and I just love the book. The thing that I loved the most was the atmosphere, this like darker atmosphere. Is something similar to how I felt when I read the Shepherd King duology. It's this dark gothic atmosphere that I absolutely love, and it just reminded me that that is a genre that I definitely need to pick up more often and research more often to find more books that are in this genre, just because that was my favorite thing about this book. There were definitely other aspects that I enjoyed. I like the trials, I like the romance, but my favorite thing was the atmosphere. I did give this originally a 4.25 star rating. However, I think I'm going to bump that up to a 4.5 star rating because I really did enjoy it. The only thing that I didn't love about this was the ending, where I felt it was a bit rushed. I would have loved to have a bit longer when things were revealed to us, because it is, whilst it is a sequel, they're interconnected standalones. So you do get the majority of the story wrapped up in this one book. And so I felt like the ending was wrapped up too quickly, and I would have loved to have things revealed to us in a bit of a slower pace. But other than that, thoroughly enjoyed this book. Picking up the second one. I'm not sure if Kaylee Smith has any other books, but I will be looking out for her future books as well, because I really liked this. Then I actually finally started the Throne of Glass series. So I started with Throne of Glass. I know you can either start with this one or start with the Assassin's Blade, but I started with this book, and as you can see, I annotated this completely. I absolutely ate this book up. I think I read it and then I went back and annotated it because I love this. My favorite thing about this was the writing style. I mean, Sarah J Maas's writing, I've read ACOTAR and I loved that as well, but this writing style I think I prefer. So I think it's referred to as third person limited, where it's written in third person, but you only know the things that the character knows. And then it's also got a couple of other perspectives. So it's not just our main female main character, we've got a few other characters' perspectives as well in the same style of writing. And I love this. It was really such a good read. I think I also read it at a good time, because prior to this, I was reading a lot of fantasy books that had more romance, whereas this is definitely more on the fantasy side of things, which was just perfect. You do get some glimpses of romance too, but it was definitely more heavy on the fantasy, which was perfect. I really enjoyed it. And this is, I think it's classed as a YA, but I could be wrong. Do check. But you have your main character who is an assassin, and she essentially enters a competition in order to win her freedom, and that's what you watch, and that's what you read, sorry. But I love this book. I gave this a 5 star rating. Like, I ate this up. I could not put it down, and it's not too chunky. It's a good amount to get through. But yeah, love this. The writing style, the main character, really fun to read, and I've been wanting to read it for a while, so I'm so glad that I finally picked this up this season, this month. Then I wanted to have a bit of a break from the more heavily fantasy books. So I actually read The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I love this. This is a cozy fantasy, and we follow our main character, Mika Moon, who is a witch, and we just follow her on her journey. Specifically, it's about loneliness and her trying to get out of that. And it was just a gorgeous book. I was emotional a few times while reading this. I gave this a 5 star rating. It was just, I think I read it at a good time as well, where it was just, I wanted a break from fantasy, from heavy fantasy books. So this still has some fantasy elements in there because she is a witch, but it's more so focused on her individual story rather than like politics or anything like that that tends to happen in a fantasy world. But I really thoroughly enjoyed this, and it made me realize that I do enjoy cozy fantasy. I think they're also great as like a palate cleanser when you still want to read some fantasy but not too heavy. They're very much based on the individual, and it was just, this was a really gorgeous book and I loved it. So this was another 5 star read for me this month, which is so great, and it made me realize, as I said, I want to read more cozy fantasy, and I definitely want to look out for those a bit more. The next book I read was Six of Crows. So I read this on Kindle Unlimited, and I also listened to the audio. This is a fantasy YA. I I enjoyed it. I gave it overall a 3.5 star rating. So you essentially have a group of characters and they go on a heist in this fantasy world. So it took me a minute to get into the story just because you have multiple POVs. But once I was into it, I enjoyed it and I liked the main characters. I started to become invested in them probably in the last maybe 30%. So it was a decent read. I did enjoy it. It wasn't my favorite read. Like, I know a lot of people love this duology. It's the first book in a duology. So I know a lot of people love this duology. I did enjoy it, and it's definitely something that I would still recommend if you're looking for a YA heist story. I think my favorite character is Kaz in both of these books, especially the second one. Kaz and Inej are probably my favorite characters. But yeah, I gave this a 3.5 star. It was a decent read. Then the next book I read was Crown of Midnight, which is the second book in the Throne of Glass series. Overall, I gave this a 4.25 star rating. This is high fantasy YA. It might be adult, not YA, but I enjoyed it. You continue straight off of Throne of Glass, like straight after, and you get to just, I'm not going to speak too much about what happens because I don't want to ruin it if you haven't read Throne of Glass, which I think most people have, but just in case you haven't, I did enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first book because I felt like there were some parts that were dragging a little bit, that were kind of repetitive from the first book, that maybe could have been included in the original first book rather than being dragged out into the second one. However, I still love the writing style, the perspectives, and there were a couple of points where I was emotional in this book, which I didn't have in the first book. Especially at the end of the book, I was very emotional. I did still very much enjoy this one, just not as much as I loved the first book. Then I read Crooked Kingdom, which was the second book in the duology, with the first book being Six of Crows. So this was the second book. Now, I gave this a 3.75 star rating, and I think the reason I enjoyed it was because I was already invested in the characters. From reading the first book, I was already invested in the characters and kind of the plot and their dynamics, which meant that I enjoyed it a bit more. I did feel like some parts dragged. I was a bit bored in certain areas, but overall I definitely enjoyed it, and I would recommend this duology, as I said, if you're looking for something that is a bit more, maybe less romance and more fantasy, and you've got a heist, and it was fun in that sense. So I did enjoy it. The next one that I read was actually The Assassin's Blade. Now, as I said, you can either read this first in the Throne of Glass series or third. So I read it in this order. So Throne of Glass, is that upside down? No. Throne of Glass, what is this? Crown of Midnight, and then The Assassin's Blade. However, I would recommend you start with The Assassin's Blade rather than reading it third. Essentially, you get the kind of history and context of things that are hinted at in the other two books and the rest of the series, especially about the main character. So you get that context. I was invested in the story because I already knew the characters, so I wanted to know the history. However, because I paused at the end of Crown of Midnight and then kind of went back in time to read this, I kind of just wanted to rush through it so that I could continue with the story with where it was left off in Crown of Midnight. So I think that kind of ruined my reading experience of it, which is my own fault. I should have read this first. So I would recommend that you start with this book, because otherwise I just feel like it ruins your experience when you have to stop and go back and then continue the story, when a lot of the time you just want to continue through and continue with the story that you're involved in right then. So because of that, I would read this first. I gave this a 3.5 star rating initially. However, that is largely because of the fact that I just wanted to continue with the story. So I think I'm actually going to bump that up to a 4 star, because I did enjoy the story. And if I read it first, it probably would have been higher than a 4 star, but because I didn't, it changed my experience of it a bit. But I did still enjoy this book, but definitely read this first, not third, in my opinion. I mean, do it the other way if you want, but that was just my experience of reading this first instead of third. Then the last book that I read in March was The Serpent and the Wings of Night, which is the first book in the Crowns of Naxia series. I think that's what it's called. I think that this is the first vampire book that I've ever read. So if you don't know, you have a main character who is a human and she goes into this competition. Wow, I've read a few books that have had competitions this month and I really, really enjoyed them. So that's fun. But yeah, you have your main female character. she's human. She goes into this competition. There are vampires there, and there's a love interest there. I really enjoyed this book. I will be continuing with that series. Overall, I gave it a 4.5-star rating. It's classed as a dark fantasy and adult. But I really enjoyed it. I read this on Kindle Unlimited and also via audio. So I switched between them basically. And I loved it. I got through it quite quickly. I enjoyed the competition. I liked the romance, and I'm looking forward to continuing the story. I think there's a novella in this series, but I could be wrong. But those were all of the books that I read this month. This is the most amount of books I've ever read in a month ever, and I'm so happy about that because I'm hoping I can continue with that momentum. And just, I've found so many authors that I enjoy, so many series that I've started, and I'm hoping to continue and complete. Also, I'm finding new genres that I enjoy, such as dark gothic fantasy and also cozy fantasy. I'm really enjoying the momentum that I'm in terms of my reading, and I've found that I really enjoy having a physical book that I'm reading and also a book that is on Kindle Unlimited and audio, because I feel like I prefer physical books and reading physical books. However, I find the audios and Kindle Unlimited a bit more convenient, especially when I'm just doing my chores around the house. I can listen to an audio, or if I'm going for a walk or commuting and things like that, it's a lot easier to have the Kindle Unlimited and audio. But then when I'm kind of reading at home and on the weekends, I can pick up a physical copy. So I'm definitely understanding and figuring out how I like to read, as well as what I like to read, which has been really fun. And I'm looking forward to continuing them. So yeah, we read, I think, 12 books in total, which is so great. And my goal for the year is to read 25 books, and from January till the end of March, I've read 17. So I'm going to have to bump up that goal because I'm definitely going to meet it. And I wasn't actually sure if I would even meet that. So that is great to hear. I think it's largely because I am figuring out the types of books that I like. Yes, fantasy, but also different types of fantasy. And I'm also starting to understand when I want to read a cozy fantasy, when I want to read something that is a bit more complicated and political, when I want something that is a bit more romantic. So it's been a lot of discovery and a lot of fun. We even had 2 5-star reads this month. So we had Throne of Glass and The Very Secret Society of Witches, which is so much fun. So yeah, it's been a very good reading month, and I'm looking forward to the next one. What books did you read this month? Did you have any 5-star reads? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.